Hi, so in this video we are going to see two things that are not really in documentation but that are pretty useful. So until now we have seen that the view components are using their own space basically, and for example they are not inside record editors. We also saw that we can pass this data to a view component and get data from a view component, but we have something that is called, for example, a refresh action. So, for example, when you have a grid inside Innovation Suite and you can just hit refresh or call a refresh action. And this refresh action can refresh the grid, for example, to display the new data. But by default, you can not refresh a view component. For example, a custom view component. It can be used, for example, for a chart. Let's say your chart is displaying data coming from a probe, and you're displaying data. You want to display data live or when the user clicks on refresh. So you would have to implement that yourself in your view component, but you might want just to have a button, out of the box button, and add an action, out of the box action, and you would like to have this refresh and just say to your view component, well, just refresh yourself. So it is actually possible to do it, and I will show you how to do it. So in the same way, I'm going to show you how to take your view component and put it inside the record editor. So here you can see that we are inside the record editor and my view component is inside of it. By default, your view component, when you create a view component, you can see that, for example, this one, I cannot drag and drop it inside the record editor. But sometimes it can be very useful to do so. Let's say I have a picture, like we saw in the previous example, and it would be very interesting to display it inside the record editor. You can see that this one cannot be inside. But this one, as you can see, I can display it inside the record editor. So how is it working? So first here is my view component. As you can see, it has an input parameter with some totally useless things. And when I'm checking my example, VC inside the record editor with refresh, you can see I have a date time here. And inside my description field here, you can see it's mapped to an output parameter for my get date. So this view component has an output parameter. And this button has an out-of-the-box refresh action. And this refresh action, I tell my view component, well, refresh. So what it does is when I hit refresh, you can see I got my time, and you can see here the date has changed. So how is it working? So you can find the example under sample library and get date. So once again, we declare a module, we declare inside bx module and xmodule.js, and in the config, so we have one input parameter, which is our dummy input parameter, and we have our output parameter, return date. So first thing is, the reason why I can drag and drop this one inside the record editor is because of this property. Can be embedded inside record editor to true. So that's the only thing you need to do if you want to insert your record editor, to insert your view component inside the record editor. So here as a bonus I put another one that can be useful from time to time. I used it once, is hide in designer palette true. So let's say I want to use a view component, but I don't want anyone else to use it. So what you can do is that you create a standard view component and you comment this code. You drag and drop the view component inside your view, you save your view, but you want to hide this view component so no one else can use it later. So you can go inside your code and say hide in designer palette true. Your view component will still be in the view, but it will not be in the palette anymore, so people cannot drag and drop it. So that's a small trick. It's not really useful, but maybe, who knows. So it could be useful for administration or something, but once again. So in our case, we have two input parameters and one input parameters and one output parameters. So we have our design. So we just display an icon clock here, an icon, which is very big because under resource partials, SAS partials, I have a getDate.css, and here you can see that this one has a custom CSS class. So how is it working? So if you look at the name, if you remember, if we look at the design directive.js, it's com example sample library getDateDesign, which is defined here in the design type. So this is the name, and it's actually the directive. So if you're familiar with AngularJS, you know that is a directive of your view component. So if we are looking in Chrome, you will find our com example sample library getDateDesign object that we have here in the CSS. Com example sample library getDateDesign. So this is some CSS we are going to apply actually not to the class but to the object himself. So we take the code and we apply a font size of 150 pixels. So here you can declare one CSS file or many if you want for your here it's for design phase. If I wanted to apply some style at runtime, I would have to use of course this one and not design. So here I'm just applying the text as center and with a big font. So when I declare a CSS, I have to import it inside the sample library CSS, and I have to import it also under x.scss. So x is for the design and sample library, not x, it's for runtime. So I just import under partials getDate. So as you can see, you don't have to put the underscore and you don't have to put the .scss. Actually, don't put the underscore and the .scss. Okay, so here the design is very simple. And let's see what happened during runtime. So during runtime, we just display date time and the message. Date time, message. So in the directive for the code, so we have two things. One, we display with broadcast the output parameters. So we saw that in previous videos. But the trick here, we have to react also to the refresh action, because by default a view component does not react to the refresh action. So once again we are going to use Rx view component event manager, but this time we have a method refresh action that is going to be called, and when I click on the refresh, when the refresh action is going to be invoked, I want this method to be called. So for that I have to build in Rx configuration API. I have to tell in refresh I want to bind the refresh action method. And when I declare this, I want to say, using the event manager like we did property changed, to say that, for example, an output parameter has been changed. So actually here you can see it's exactly the same thing. Here we are just broadcasting that the output parameter has changed with a new value. So the same way we are saying, well, we have an API that has changed, and we are passing the value scope Rx configuration.api. So since we mapped refresh to refresh action, when we are going to click on the refresh, it's going to look for inside the API, Rx configuration API for the refresh. And you will find the refresh action method. So you will call this method. That's why we display this message, and it will get the date. The date will be built and sent back, broadcast as an output parameter. So here it's a very simple example. Like I said, most of example could be, for example, to be refreshed even automatically, or for charts. That would be maybe the main use case.